Welcome to our Making of Apples Never Fall panel. Today we're joined by costume designer Allyson B. Fanger, production designer Tony Fanning, cinematographer Robert Humphreys, and editor Jacquelyn Way. Thank you all for being here. This show was adapted from Leanne Moriarty's book. So what was your familiarity with the book before this, and did you use it as a resource in any way? Let's start with Robert.
Yes, I did read the book. I've read a lot of Leanne's books mainly because I just enjoy reading them because they always such a fabulous story. And she also writes very visually. They always write like a narrative story. And even way before this project came up, I read this book. And enjoyed it. And I was very familiar with the story before we started. Yes.
Allyson, how about you?
I had not read the book. I did know Leanne Moriarty as a writer. I was familiar with the other books that had been made into limited series also, Big Little Lies and Nine Perfect Strangers. So I was familiar in that way. So I was very drawn to it I love a family dynamic. I love the stylistic nature of the other adaptations. So I was really excited about being a part of this one. I didn't know it. I listened to it at the recommendation of Annette Bening. I listened to it as an audiobook. And so that was kind of fun. And it was fun too, because, the book was set in Australia, but the show was set in Florida, but we were in Australia. So it was its own plot twist of itself, sort of. It was fun.
And you gotta do whatever Annette Bening tells you to do. So
yeah,
Absolutely.
I was like, she's right. Had great book recommendations in general. Just FYI.
you need to start a book club.
Yeah, exactly.
Tony, how about you?
I did read the book. I knew Leanne's work prior, but I hadn't read this book, and I did read it prior to meeting with the showrunner, and really enjoyed the book. And I always try to do that if a show is based on a book, because they're just small kind of character details and little elements that you discover through reading the book that sometimes don't make it into the show, but that you can, give a nod to in a lot of ways. I found when I did a series called Castle Rock that I loved reading and is exploring all the details in Stephen King's books. And since doing that, I really, kind of try to take a lot of small elements from the books and, in this case, Americanize them. But it's mostly about character I paid attention to.
Sure. Jacquelyn, how about you?
I had read a bunch of her books, and I read Apples a while before this was even a project or an option. But I brushed up on it again before the interview. But I love her books, and I just love the characters and the family drama aspect of it all. So I was very excited to have the opportunity to work on this.
Well, like Allyson said, the book was set in Australia, but the show moved the setting to West Palm Beach, Florida, but it was still filmed in Australia. Great plot twist. I feel like I've never been to either place, but I feel like the climate that's very similar, but how did that affect each of your approaches to your job? Like Tony, let's start with you, especially with scouting locations. Like, what were you looking for that would speak Florida?
Well, I think the layout of the Gold Coast is kind of similar to Palm Beach in that it was a developed area by the shoreline that they then continued to make canals, waterways into the shoreline so they could get boats in. The big difference for me was that we didn't find a lot of that development happened in the late 20s and further, but on the Gold Coast, it wasn't developed until around the 60s, I believe. So you didn't have that kind of older, more stately architecture that Palm Beach there are some recognizable landmarks from Palm Beach that we couldn't find anything close. There's a little bit, the style of the architecture is much cleaner and much, because I believe it's a harsher environment in Australia. The way they build the structures are more protective for the weather. Both of them deal with a lot of rain and sun, but the heat is much harsher in Australia, I would say.
Robert, how about you?
Actually a good question. I've shot on the Gold Coast a few times for the States, and I've actually shot the Gold Coast for Miami before on another film. And I've been to Palm Beach and West Palm Beach and Florida quite a few times over the years for various projects. And also on this particular project, we went twice to look at, locations and look at, basically location recce's with the director. And I find there's a lot of similarities. Like I think especially West Palm Beach and the Gold Coast, I think is a very simple swap. And Tony's absolutely right. The architecture is different. The Gold Coast was basically built in the 60s and 70s. So you have a lot of brick buildings and a lot of, and the colors are way more muted and narrower than West Palm Beach in Florida. I think in Australia, it's mainly grays and whites and there's not much color at all. So I'm sure Tony had his challenges to add color into the show.
Yeah, like more palm trees and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, palm trees are there. There's palm trees. The light is very, very, very similar in the Gold Coast and Palm Beach. I think because you have the Gulf Stream running up and down the coast there's a lot of low-lying cloud in Florida, which the Gold Coast, I don't know if you noticed, Tony and Allyson, but it's much higher up the clouds. So you'd have to be very astute and very visual to kind of notice that. But the atmospheric conditions are slightly different and it's a bit hazier in Florida. But in general, it's a really good match. And the Florida is definitely flatter than the Gold Coast. So trying not to film mountains and kind of things was probably a little bit of a production design challenge. Again, Tony didn't mention that, but there's a lot of shooting away from hills and shooting away from mountains and trying to make it as flat as possible. So there were challenges, but from my perspective, they were Tony's challenges, not cinematography challenges. So because visually and the light and everything is it's a very, very close match, and it's not that difficult from my perspective. So I really enjoyed the challenges I had, but they were way less than the production.
It was all Tony. Tony had to solve
it was all Tony. He provided all of that. He provided that world that we filmed.
Well, Allyson, from a costuming perspective, did you use any local designers or sourcing from any local shops down there?
I did, but that was, I have to say that was quite challenging because especially with the show and the characters and the tennis culture, and it was very in Palm Beach and West Palm Beach, you're talking about a very Americana niche aesthetic for the family and for the show overall. And so that is quite different than the Australian aesthetic in general. It's just a very, very different looking. So that was quite challenging. I'm not gonna lie about that. That was hard, but it was exciting, and I'm always up for a challenge. And it was like I did find some really interesting designers that were local. I really wanted to, and I wish I'd had even more time to do so because there were some really interesting, new designers. Also Australian, the economy is built such that they are very insular from a brand perspective, which I appreciate and respect. So I was trying to work within that also, but all the brands were different. It was like learning an entirely new language, like the brands I was used to using that I use on a daily weren't there. So it was sort of like,
it's like their own ecosystem down
yeah,
there.
and it makes sense. It's like as it should be. I think it's a smart way to around the country. But it was its own thing. And we did have I obviously had a lot of things sent in, but I also worked within what I found. I found brands. I had to go to the Gold Coast in particular also is kind of a vacation-y area. So it wasn't a lot of great shopping. I did go to Sydney a couple of times to do some shopping with like, 20 giant suitcases on a weekend and come back. So it was challenging, but it was great. I think the BG was the hardest thing for me because they looked Australian. So I had to really see every single one of them head to toe every time before anybody got on in the lens. But it was good. It was good. I think we pulled it off, guys. It looks good.
Well, Jacquelyn, from your perspective in the edit, like, are you like looking for certain cuts and frames where that doesn't give away that it's Australia here?
Well, I think it's a testament to what everybody did on set. It really, like, there were very few times where we were really fighting that sort of stuff. Integrating some of the drone shots and some of the stock we got from Florida was probably the hardest part, just because a lot of that would come in hazy and dull skies and stuff like that. And all the shots from Australia were so bright and so beautiful that it was constantly trying to really dig to get the best shots from our drones and stuff like that to mix into the show and make it feel cohesive. But on set, everybody did such a great job. We had so many exterior locations and stuff that were just shot and looked totally like Florida, and we didn't have too many replacements. I think there's a couple where we got rid of a mountain or a hill in the background, but for the most part, it was not that difficult. It was a pretty good match. Yeah.
Well, Tony, the Delaney home is the main setting, and it really does feel like a true lived-in house. Like they've been there for 40 years, and you have a sense of history and like the family's legacy with all the tennis trophies and clutter. And I love the layout because it feels very warm and open and earthy, but the family themselves, they're not open with each other. So what were your inspirations for the house?
Well, it's interesting that you say earthy, because that was one of the first conversations Melanie and I had, was about the earthy quality of the family and the fact that they even though they spend most of their time outdoors, their interiors are relatable interior exterior. And so we wanted to have the exterior be a presence in the house in all of the environments that we chose. And we did want to stick with that earthy quality. So in terms of choices and finishes and fabrics, wall coverings, we tried to go for very textural, natural materials, using wood, using linen, like beautiful cottons, things that had different textures and kind of breathable quality to everything, so that because they're athletic, they need to be able to take care of themselves. So we wanted that to be part of it, and we started with the family house with that idea, and then we chose how each of the siblings took that from the family home and how they interpreted that, or how they continued using those ideas. So that was a primary idea for the house there. But the house is broken into 3 parts. The front of the house is actually a location on the Gold Coast, and we built practically 2 full interiors. The full interior is on the stage with a forced perspective backyard, and the full exterior tennis court is actually on a back lot that we built on a location. So it's broken up into 3 parts. But when I read the book originally, and when I read the pilot script before meeting Melanie, I really had this strong impression that I wanted the tennis court to be a constant presence in the house, and that tennis was always there as a reminder for the family. They just couldn't avoid it at all times. So we really tried to design the house in a way that the majority of the house looks onto the tennis court, so that it's always a presence that's
it's like
there.
looming over them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we couldn't get it in every room, but the most used rooms, fully see the tennis court at all times. So that was kind of how we approached that. And we did try to, our director, Chris, really wanted the tennis colors to be kind of a through line through it. We really wanted to use a lot of green, a lot of blue and white with accents of yellow, and then bring in Florida colors like coral and some lavenders and things like that. But it's a very strong green show, and that was kind of intentional. Chris really wanted that relationship to the exterior to be reflected in almost everything.
Is that why the court is a green clay? It's not a blue hard
Well,
court?
that's another specific thing to Florida. Because of the humidity and how wet it is in Florida, they mostly have hard courts, but the pro tennis courts there are this kind of green clay, which is not available in Australia. You can't find that. So we made up a compound that imitated the clay that we built our main tennis court from. But we tried to find tennis courts, but we were up against grass courts and hard courts that didn't read the same way. So we made choices that
you don't want a grass court. It'll just like,
grass courts
immediately.
aren't they're not prominent in
Yeah.
Florida because they get kind of mucky. So it's really a hard court or the clay, which the clay allows the water to go through it and keep itself dry. So anyway, that's a whole nother story. I know more about making tennis courts and figuring out tennis courts than I want to. And it was hard for me to watch the movie Challengers because I just was like, it's all about tennis courts again.
Well, they were on hard court, so it's different, but yeah.
They were on hard courts, but we did want to go, try and keep the color ideas kind of throughout. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, Allyson, with the costumes, like obviously this is an athletic family and they wear a lot of sporty clothing at leisure. But did you look to the tennis styles of any real players? Because I felt kind of like Joy and Stan were very reminiscent of 70s and 80s icons. Like Joy, her style felt very like Chris Everett and Martina Navratilova. And even Troy, who was supposed to be the champion of the family, he is so polished also because he's a venture capitalist, but he reminded me of Roger Federer. So what were
exactly. Yeah, I did have sort of my muses for each of the characters, like a tennis muse, like an iconic tennis, like Stan was Jimmy Connors, like old school. And Troy was Roger Federer. So you nailed that one. Like I had all my different characters because it was good for me to baseline. It's good whenever I'm developing a character, and I knew that tennis was such a big part of everything about them. It was like in their very fibers as a family. And it also was the unity, like what Tony was saying, it's like a unifying element in the family that you carries through, and each of them, develop and express it in their different ways because they're all very distinct characters, even within the family. And when I do families, I love to find the threads that connect them and yet the ways in which they're different, obviously, because that's just how families actually are. And it's cool. And we had the tennis that was like a good place to do it with. So Brooke was probably the most consistently, well, so is Troy, but Brooke was the closest to her father. So we kept her the most in sort of tennis-y, athleisure-y versions. Like she wore a feminine version sort of Stan's silhouette, really, when it gets down to it. Like some of the pieces, like some of the Oxford shirts that she wore, I imagined or that she got those out of his closet. She wore some of Stan's old shirts. She wore some of Logan's shirts, and she wore track pants, and Stan wore track pants, but she wore different brands. She wore her own brands. And then Troy and Stan had this interesting relationship because they both were, you know, very ego-y, and in a way Troy was sort of the anti-Stan in the way his looks were athletic clothes but very understated, very expensive understated, like Grayson and reigning champ, and no logos and no names, because he just was like, his whole thing was like, if you know, he's like that level of, you know, of class, of like, I don't know, expensive style, expensiveness. And Stan was the opposite. You know, Stan was logoed. He was like the guy, he was like the Coach guy who always wore, you know, some brand name on each
Tequila all
piece.
everywhere.
Oh,
Yeah.
everywhere. I was like, he's a sponsor. He's like sponsored, you know. And even when he was dressed up, I wanted him to look a little bit like he's the coach at the banquet, who looks a little bit out of, like, kind of strangely dressed up in his sports coat, you know, but maybe his like coachy pants, like that was his sort of vibe. And then yeah, Brooke was through, and then Amy, you know, because Amy was sort of on her own path of,
A lot of
Amy's on her own
captains.
path.
Yeah.
She's the most out there. She's like, you know, that whole like spirituality path, soul self-searching, soul searching, spirit, you know, looking for answers. And but she had to have the tennis too. So her tennis was kind of more the stuff that she still had at the house, you know, like those old terry cloth gym shorts, and like a tie-dye shirt that she had in her closet from forever ago. That was more when we brought tennis in for her. We kind of stuck to it that way from her
Mhm.
past a little bit, but still there. She could still play. They could all play.
Yeah, we saw her playing the premiere, so
Yeah,
a little bit.
exactly.
She netted the
Yeah.
ball, but it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Robert, you shot the first two episodes and the last two, right? And I mean, the show is, you know, ostensibly about a perfect family, but the truth is, like, they're very messy and a lot of secrets and dysfunction beneath the surface. And you kind of see that in the visual language of the show because it's very beautiful and gorgeous on the surface, but the handheld style, like, you know, signals like there's something like lurking underneath, like, you know, disquieting. So what did you and Melanie and Chris Sweeney, the director, talk about in creating that juxtaposition?
Chris and Melanie's saw the show very much as a family dynamic, a kind of an ensemble show with, especially the four children being very much like you know, you often see all four on screen together, and often you see all six on screen together. And so it was very much a style devised based on the fact that there was always going to be a lot of people in frame at any one time. So hence the widescreen, you know, it was all shot anamorphic widescreen, and that was very deliberate to encompass the whole family pretty much all the time. And Chris was a stickler to filming. He liked a lot of coverage, mainly because he felt reactions were as important as the dialogue, the principal dialogue. So how one child reacted to what another child was saying, or what dad's, you know, reaction to, you know, something. So we did a lot of coverage of everyone's reaction to everything. And often in these wider, you know, anamorphic frames where you see two or three or four people in frame at any one time. But because of the nature of anamorphic, one person can be prominent in the foreground, and then in the background, you'll still see the interaction between the other characters. So it was that kind of, that framing was very deliberate. And it also goes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the sets to echo what Tony said too, because
Tony did all the work, so yeah.
yeah, no, it's just like, for a start, I thought the house was absolutely brilliant. And what Tony did with splitting that one house up into three locations, where we had the front of the house in a real street, but the moment you walk through the front door of that house, there was nothing, you know, it died straight away. So we had to then match that to an interior built on stage. And then if you walk through the house on stage, you walk out the back, then there's a third location, which is this back lot, which had a real tennis court and a real garden on it. But the back lot also had the whole back of the house built. So marrying up these three stages to look like one was my, not challenge for me, but principal delight in the whole project. Like, I loved the fact that there was this identical structure built in two different places. So I spent a lot of time on the real backlot just looking at what the sun did. Like, but in pre-production, I spent hours out there just watching what the sun did to the inside of the house. And what we then did was we replicated that look identically on stage with the lighting. So the way the stage is lit is totally based on what was actually happening in the real house.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
I'd challenge anyone to spot what was shot where. Like, every now and again,
That's a new game for viewers now.
yeah, yeah, every now and
Well,
again, you go, oh yeah, that's the backlot or whatever. But it's pretty difficult, a lot of it, and it's mainly because it's an identical match, like the furniture, the lighting, the way it's lit, everything is matched to each other. So that was a fun challenge to have.
yeah.
But getting back to the style of the shoot, yeah, the handheld is very much a Chris Sweeney and obviously Melanie, where she wanted Florida to feel kind of quite glorious and colorful and beautiful, but the whole show to have an undertone of like this thriller element to it, going, it's about a murder mystery. So the handheld kind of undercuts the glorious kind of pretty pictures of Florida, and that was very much a deliberate kind of choice to do that. And then the kind of coverage style where the camera's very much alive and very much sit back and watches what's happening in front of it without being too intrusive. Like, there's very little flashy photography. It's all very straight,
Yeah.
naturalistic kind of style of
And you
photography.
apply that in like the tennis scenes too, which I think is
Yeah.
also important because I think it's hard to capture sports on screen in general, but especially in tennis, because when you're watching a real match, the camera is stationary on the baseline
Yeah.
during the
Well,
game.
we watched a lot of television coverage, obviously, and the way that's shot is very long lenses with cameras miles away. So, you have these huge telephoto lenses filming everything. So number one approach to the tennis was get rid of that and get on the court with the actors and get right in their face with the camera. So you'll find, we're often handheld with the actor right in front of them as they're playing tennis. So we're trying to be in
And
their
you feel
head.
you feel the tension between them, especially between Stan and
Yeah, and
uh,
that created a lot of challenges, and I'm with the fact that some of the actors were better tennis players than others, and
I've
um,
heard Jake was the best one.
yeah, I'm not sure how much detail I'm even allowed to go into in that area, but there's obviously a lot of
Different
CGI help.
levels, we all can't be great at tennis, so.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Jacquelyn, you're the one who puts this all together, and not only do you have the past and present timelines, but the structure of the show is interesting because each episode focuses on one of the family members, with the exception of the premiere, which is the whole family. So what did you and Melanie discuss about crafting the episodes around each character so we're, immediately inside their world and their headspace?
Yeah, we talked immediately about how we were going to really feel the presence and the episode, the titular characters episode from the beginning in terms of tone, from everything for how we were scoring them and what music was being placed. And also like how that wrapped into the bigger mystery. So we were very conscious. A lot of the scenes in the past, or the scenes that focus on the titular character, are very much around their point of view and their perspective. And Melanie did an amazing job with the writing team to bring us like directly into each perspective at the beginning of every episode. So you have this great scene that'll start with Logan scraping the barnacles off the boat, or Troy in the middle of his, like getting ready in the morning. So we were really conscious to make sure that we were tonally staying with their story for those moments. And then when we get into the bigger mystery of it all, then we kind of open the world up to, where is Joy and what scenes in the past do we see her in and things like that. So we were doing a lot in terms of how we, even from choosing shots and whose point of view we were in and who we wanted to spend time with. And also just being aware that like the ensemble of it all, you do want to make sure that you're catching all these looks, and, you know, you see that Logan and Brooke are sharing this moment, but Troy is not, you know, paying attention. He doesn't know what's going on there and stuff like that. So we talked really early on about just making sure that we were balancing the bigger ensemble, as well as feeling like every episode had its own, you know, genetic makeup for each of these kids.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I talked to Jake Lacey last week, and I asked him when it's another character's episode if he played Troy any differently, like if he treated that episode as like that character's subjective view of Troy, and he said he didn't. He felt like maybe that was something that came together in the edit. So I'll ask you now, like, was this something like you thought about or discussed with like Melanie or anyone about like the character specific gaps? Like, would you lean more towards how the characters saw the world, or would you favor what they're seeing and, you know, include more shots of like what they were seeing?
Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. You know, when we're on those specific characters episodes, we are definitely getting more insight into their backstory and the things that affect them and the way they see the world. So we were always sure to like be like, okay, well, in this moment, you know, Logan would react this way. And his reaction is going to come off of Jake's line that to him would be more aggressive, you know? So there would be nuances where we would toy with like, okay, if we're seeing this from Logan's point of view, his brother's going to be more of a jerk, right? So you want to use the more amplified line for that and stuff like that. So we did take that into account. And then when you get to Joy's episode, you get to see all of these pieces that have been missing and kind of like the missing perspective, which was also a lot of fun to do.
Yeah,
And
it's the final piece of the puzzle. Yeah. Well, we have to wrap soon, but a final question. You know, the show ends on a very hopeful note for the Delaney's, and we feel like, you know, maybe they'll like start, you know, going to therapy or something. But what do each of you think will happen to Savannah slash Lindsay? Tony, let's start with you.
Oh, that's hard because we did have an alternate ending at one point, so I'm kind of
Mhm.
influenced by that. But I think she continues on her path. She doesn't stray from it, and she finds a new target or
Mhm.
targets
More grifting.
or grifting. Yes.
Allison, how about you?
That is such an interesting question. Where do we think she goes from here? You mean from the end?
Yeah, from the car crash.
I think I would imagine she carries on also. I just want to take a minute though to talk about Savannah for a second because she was such an interesting character because she was a non-character in a way all the way through, and then we had to kind of find her character at the end of all that. We didn't even know she was going to be till the very end, so that was like an interesting challenge and sort of fun I did with Melanie. We didn't decide till the very end, so I would imagine she is going to like live out her days in her family cottage, and maybe she found some peace though with this joy journey.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
she
she
found
she said
some
she forgives Joy, so
yeah,
maybe she
she
can move
forgives
on.
joy.
Yeah.
She finds some healing. Maybe she'll go find her mom in that where was the mom
Oh, somewhere in Florida, yeah.
in Florida.
Yeah, when they drove over.
Who knows?
Yeah.
The
Mhm.
crazy mom, who knows?
Yeah. Robert, how are you?
She has such crazy mixed motivations, Savannah. Like you kind of I loved her character actually. I loved the intrigue and the mystery of it all. So I think I'm with Tony. I think she's a bad apple. And I think she had odd motivations for this story where she wanted to like get even with the family and she kind of did that. But I don't think she's on a path to redemption. No, I think she's
Will,
she's off.
will she continue to torment Harry? Like he's returning to tour.
I see her
I don't
very
know.
much as
There's a
the
restraining
Patricia
order, but
Highsmith. You know those Patricia Highsmith film, like Ripley, Talented
yeah.
Mr. Ripley, and the Jason, I think she's that type of sociopath that, there could be another great story with Savannah in it down the
Savannah's
track.
the new Tom Ripley. I love it.
Yeah.
Jacquelyn, how about you?
I mean, she did apologize to Joy at the last moment. And to me, I feel like maybe she'll like slightly fix her ways, but I also think she's coming back to check on Joy again. Like, there's no way she's done with Joy.
No, no way.
So,
And I feel like Joy would still take her in. Like she's just that type of person.
yeah, she's
Yeah.
not totally
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, it was great speaking with all of you. Thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on the show. It was great. And thank you so much again. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Take care.
you. So yeah, bye.